Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're getting into something that's profoundly difficult, but really crucial for understanding human behavior. We're looking at the complex two-way relationship between shame and problematic sexual behavior.
Right, and this is an area just defined by emotional intensity. The source material we've looked at is, well, it's unified on one point. Addiction and shame are often inseparable.
Inseparable.
Researchers, therapists, going all the way back to Fossum and Mason in the 80s, have pretty much confirmed that this is one of the most shame-based disorders out there.
Okay, so let's unpack that core emotion before we go any further. When we say shame is fueling this cycle, what are we really talking about? Because it gets confused with guilt all the time.
And that distinction is everything. It's absolutely critical. Shame, as Fossum and Mason defined it, is an inner sense of being completely diminished or insufficient as a person.
So it's not about what you did, it's about who you are.
Exactly. It's an internal judgment. You feel fundamentally defective, unworthy. The key is the target. It's not about doing something wrong. It's about being something wrong.
And that feeling, that deep sense of being flawed, that's what becomes the engine for the whole cycle. So here's our core question for you to think about as you listen. How does this feeling fuel the behavior? And then how does the behavior turn around and just intensify the shame? As a loop.
It's the absolute definition of a vicious cycle. And the paradox is striking because the behavior starts as a desperate attempt to medicate that emotional pain.
Can you describe that oscillation for us? What happens when the shame just gets to be too much?
Well, the behavior provides a temporary fix, a moment of pleasure or self-soothing, a really intense but very brief relief from that unbearable feeling. But then almost immediately after, that fix is gone.
And it's replaced by what?
Replaced by an even higher, more intense level of shame, often linked directly to the consequences of the act itself.
So it's a brutal feedback loop. You use the behavior to stop feeling bad about yourself, but the behavior immediately makes you feel 10 times worse. You just can't win.
You can't, and that's why we have to keep coming back to the difference between shame and guilt. Guilt is actually functional.
Functional. How so?
It focuses on the action, I did something bad, and that feeling motivates positive change. You can apologize, you can make amends, you can grow.
It gives you a path forward.
It does. It offers the possibility of reparation. Shame, on the other hand, is inhibiting. Fossum and Mason argued it offers no positive effects. It makes you want to hide, to isolate.
Because it's about your core self.
Yes, it's a negative feeling about who you are as a person, and we know that this kind of deep-seated shame is linked to, well, a whole host of other mental health challenges. Anxiety, depression, aggression, really low self-esteem.
Okay, so that intense internal state helps explain why people are looking for an escape. But how do we draw the line? Where's the boundary between, a healthy high sex drive and a genuine compulsion?
That is such a critical clarification. A high libido is not the problem. We are talking about compulsive, problematic sexual behavior. The self-help sources we reviewed point to some key red flags that draw that line.
And it's not about frequency, right?
Not at all. It's about how you engage. A person with a healthy, high libido generally doesn't live a secret life steeped in lies and shame.
So secrecy is one of the red flags.
A huge one. The addiction is marked by secrecy and self-violation. So violating your own ethical principles, taking serious financial or legal risks, exposing loved ones to STDs, things like that.
I see. There's also this idea of a trance-like state.
Yes, ritualization. The behavior becomes so ritualized that it can result in a dissociative state where the person is just totally oblivious to the negative consequences in that moment.
That's a crucial distinction. It moves the focus away from how often and onto the fallout, the consequences, the loss of control, the secrecy.
And if we want to put a diagnostic lens on this, we can look at the formal classification. It's called Compulsive Sexual Behavior Disorder, or CSBD, which was added to the ICD-11 back in 2018.
So what does that look like clinically? What are the main criteria?
You're looking for persistent, intense urges that lead to repetitive activities. You're looking for unsuccessful attempts to control it. You're looking for someone continuing the behavior despite obvious negative consequences, and all of this causing significant distress for 6 months or more.
Okay, and what about this point on moral judgments?
I'm glad you brought that up. The criteria explicitly state that the distress is not just because of moral judgments about sex, it's about the functional damage. The person can't control the behavior, and it's ruining their life.
That nuance feels huge, but I imagine it's still really complicated to apply consistently.
It is. Very inconsistent. A study in Singapore reviewed 78 clinical cases against these new criteria.
And what they find?
They found only 8% of the cases they reviewed actually met the criteria. And what's maybe more concerning is that the agreement between different clinicians looking at the same case, it was statistically pretty weak.
Wow. So even with new standardized rules, they couldn't agree on a diagnosis.
Right. And that low agreement score, that's the real takeaway. It tells us this new definition is proving hard to apply in the real world, and it just highlights the need for better standardized training.
Okay, so that diagnostic challenge is why the research is so important. Let's get into what those empirical studies actually found about this link between shame and behavior.
Let's do it.
So how do people try to manage this internal pain? What did the research by Reed and his colleagues say about how hypersexual patients cope with shame?
They found they displayed significantly higher levels of maladaptive coping strategies, destructive defense mechanisms.
I like what?
3 main ones stood out: withdrawal, so isolating; attack self, which is that intense self-criticism; and attack other, which is basically transferring that negative feeling outward by blaming others.
So the problem isn't just the behavior, it's how they're defending themselves from the shame that's driving it.
Precisely. The shame isn't passive, it's actively driving these destructive responses.
Now, another study by Reed looked at how shame leads to the behavior. Is it a direct line? You feel shame, you act out.
It seems it's not that direct, no. They introduced facets of neuroticism, things like anxiety, hostility, impulsivity, and they found those traits mediated the effect.
Mediated. So shame doesn't just hit the act out button directly.
Correct. Instead, shame seems to light the fuse. It activates these secondary issues like intense anxiety or poor impulse control, and those are what actually drive the sexual behaviors.
The shame is the trigger, and the inability to handle the resulting anxiety is the mechanism. That makes a lot of sense. What about gender differences? The literature has often been so male-focused.
This is a huge finding, and it's still criminally understudied. In mixed gender samples, they found that shame proneness predicted hypersexuality in men.
Okay, that fits the model we've been discussing.
It does. But in women, detachment was the significant predictor. Not shame, not guilt. Detachment.
Wait, that's a massive difference. So if men are driven by the shame of being defective, women might be driven more by emotional disconnection.
That's the current theory. For women, the behavior might be more about self-soothing through emotional disconnection and absence of intimacy, rather than the male pattern of compensating for shame.
So the treatment approach might need to be totally different depending on gender.
It very well might. They also found that external consequences, legal trouble, financial loss, were a much stronger predictor of shame in females, suggesting their shame really kicks in hard when the real-world fallout becomes undeniable.
Interesting. Okay, let's bring in the digital world. Technology makes anonymous behavior so much easier. How does that affect the immediate feeling of shame?
Right, so a study compared younger digital natives with older digital migrants. They found digital natives, the ones who grew up with the internet, reported lower levels of shame.
Which makes perfect sense. Anonymity is a shield. If you can do it in secret online, you suppress that initial social threat, that immediate shame that might otherwise stop you.
Exactly. Which brings us to a major pivot towards recovery. If shame is the fire, what puts it out? In 2014, Reed and colleagues found that self-compassion mediated the effects of both shame and rumination on the behavior.
Self-compassion, a direct antidote to that attack self-coping strategy we talked about.
It is. It suggests that teaching self-compassion is a critical first step, a foundational intervention in the early stages of recovery.
Let's shift our focus now from the source of the problem to the solution. There's an old saying in recovery circles, stopping isn't the problem is staying stopped.
It is. And that's all about managing the emotional triggers that reignite the compulsion. This is where the practical tools from self-help sources become so valuable.
And it starts with identifying those triggers, right? Internal and external.
Exactly. Internal triggers are those unwanted feelings: guilt, shame, powerlessness, boredom, anger. The behavior becomes the escape hatch.
And external triggers are the environmental cues.
Right. Passing a certain street, watching a specific scene in a movie, or just being home alone with nothing to do. Identifying these specific patterns is the bedrock of preventing relapse.
And a really vital tool for this is the 4 circles model.
Yes, the 4 circles. It creates a clear visual roadmap. You have your inner circle in red. These are the compulsive bottom line behaviors that have to stop immediately.
The non-negotiables.
Right. Then the middle circle in yellow, which are the questionable behaviors. They might not be destructive on their own, but they put you at high risk of sliding back into the red.
And the other 2 circles focus on feelings and solutions.
That's right. The feeling circle in blue lists the emotional states, anxiety, frustration that push you toward the danger zones. And finally, the outer circle in green. This is where you list all the healthy activities that enhance your life. Hobbies, exercise, connection. That's where you want to put your energy.
That structured approach seems like it would really help manage the denial patterns that keep the cycle going. The justifications, the minimization.
Absolutely. Recognizing those denial patterns, I'm entitled, it's no big deal, I can control this. That's the first step. Denial thrives on secrecy, and secrecy protects the shame.
Okay, let's move into our final section on strategies. What are some specific, actionable ways people can deal with those overwhelming urges when they hit?
The first one is simple but powerful. Postponement. When the urge strikes, just practice postponing the action. Just for 10 minutes, maybe an hour. Often, the initial intensity will pass.
And you need a plan for that 10 minutes.
You must have a pre-written list of distracting, healthy behaviors ready to go. The second strategy is to interrupt the isolation.
Get support.
Yes. Talk to a non-judgmental friend, a family member, anyone in your support system. Shame loves isolation. Connection is like pouring water on it. Another tool is to carry a physical consequence list in your wallet.
A list of past harms and future risks.
Exactly. Reading that can break the trance and serve as a powerful, sobering reminder of the stakes.
And finally, there's the Universal Recovery Rule, HALT.
You can't forget this one. Never let yourself get too hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Those 4 states dramatically increase the risk of relapse. You have to learn to recognize them and practice immediate self-care.
And it's crucial that this is active recovery. Replacing passive avoidance like just watching more TV with healthy coping strategies from that green circle, telling the truth, journaling, exercising.
Yes, because the foundation of any lasting change is self-acceptance and forgiveness. Self-hate just throws more fuel on the fire. A slip isn't a catastrophe, it's data. It's a chance to learn what part of your recovery plan needs to be strengthened.
So to bring this all together for you, the listener, the evidence is clear. There's a deep two-way link between shame and hypersexuality. To address the symptom, you absolutely have to address that underlying feeling of worthlessness.
And we started by highlighting that finding about technology, right? That online anonymity can suppress the immediate shame.
Which facilitates the behavior.
Right. But the shame from the consequences still remains a powerful predictor of deeper issues. So this raises a really important final question for you to think about.
Which is?
What might this fluid, technology-fueled relationship mean for treating complex emotions like shame in a world where concealment is easier than ever?
It's a challenge to you to really consider how technology impacts the experience of your own internal life. Are you using these tools to cope, or just to mask a feeling you need to face? Something to consider long after this deep dive is over.